Welcome to The Rest Is Politics, leading with me, Rory Stewart.
And me, Alastair Campbell. And we are delighted to have with us the First Minister of Wales, Eluned Morgan, who I have known for many years, who is a Welsh speaker from Cardiff, who is somebody who's had several ministerial posts before this one in the Welsh Government, and before that was a member of the European Parliament, which I think was when I first got to know you, largely through our mutual friends, the Kinnocks. And we've also been involved in mental health campaigns together because Eluned is a great mental health campaigner. And something of a reluctant First Minister. Is that fair?
Yes, a little bit. I did put my name in before, but I didn't put my name in the second time. So, yeah, it was an unexpected pleasure to become First Minister in the summer after a little bit of a turmoil within our party.
Turmoil. And for international British listeners, tell us a little bit about the role of First Minister and the powers that Wales has independent of the United Kingdom.
So we've had a devolved government now for 25 years. Initially, there were actually quite few powers, but over the years, we now have lawmaking powers, we have a big budget, we have a power to vary taxation, and we have responsibility for things like health, education, aspects of the economy, transport. So actually quite a lot of areas that touches people's lives on top of obviously having an overview on what happens at local government level.
And do you think that the balance is about right? Do you think some of those powers should return to Westminster, or you should take more powers from Westminster, or do you think the balance is about right?
I certainly don't think there's a need to take anything back, because I've always been a believer in try and get politics as close as you can to the people. So subsidiarity, that's the big European approach, isn't it? And I've always believed in that. And what's important is you don't just do subsidiarity from the UK to Wales. You should be doing it within Wales as well, making sure that you can get power decision-making as close as you can to people. So in terms of where we're at now, I think the balance, I certainly wouldn't be giving any powers back, but I think there are little areas around the edges, things like youth justice, for example, where we have lots of the powers to make the difference, because the infrastructure for, apprenticeships and education and all of those things that are so important to getting people back on the right track, we've got the power over those, and there's a disconnect with the Home Office and things. So that is a problem that I think there's a few areas like that need to be ironed out.
Now, can we go right back to the beginning, 1967, when you were born in Ely in Cardiff, and your dad was a vicar. And to think about that, we've had Theresa May on the podcast, Angela Merkel. Then you think about Gordon Brown. You think about Douglas Alexander. What do you think your upbringing in that kind of household gave to you that may have contributed to you becoming a politician?
I remember reading a book, Jeremy Paxman wrote a book a few years ago and said, what kind of people go into politics? And he identified Vicar's kids as a group. We're obviously brought up with that sense of service. So that's the example we're given in our communities.
But often people rebel.
They do, and I think it's kind of which path do you tread, really. And I've got to say, I was a little bit more naughty than Theresa May, who kind of ran through a field of wheat. I was a bit.
Go on, then you've set yourself up for that. What was the naughtiest thing?
I'm not telling you.
What was the naughtiest thing you've done?
There is no way I'm going there on this programme. But what I did have was an upbringing. It was a council housing estate. It was the largest council housing estate in Europe. There'd been a couple of riots there. That's what has drawn attention to it. And my dad, our vicarage was right in the middle of the estate. And most of the things in the community were centred around the church. It was the church that held a lot of it together. So he ran a disco, one of the first discos in South Wales, 800 people coming in every week. way before health and safety laws came in. He ran it, yeah.
And is that not a bit embarrassing, like the trendy vicar in the disco?
Well, it was a bit. Can you imagine him rocking up in his collar? But he was a real working class bloke, and kind of he used to love bouncing. He'd get in there and grab people by their hair if they were messing about. You know, he wouldn't take any messing, and he was really respected. And then Shakin' Stevens and people used to turn up to the disco, and then we all had to muck in. So we had bingo every Tuesday, and you had to go into the bingo, and we all had to set it all up, and you'd had to clear up at the end of the night, and you couldn't see your hand in front of your face because of all the smoke that everybody was smoking, and it was just an amazing upbringing. But crucially, it was a really poor area, and there were a lot of people who were in trouble, and we had an open house. I mean, literally all times, the day and night. We had people from, I remember there's a lad who walked from the other side of Cardiff. He was kicked out of his house by his mother at about age 11. He walked the other side from the city, turned up at his father's house, who said, "Okay, you can come in," with his new wife, but you've got to leave before we get up in the morning, and you've got to be in bed after we've gone to bed. So he literally, my dad found him in the back of the church, and he came to our house every day. He came for breakfast, and there were lots of kids like that, and that was just part of what we grew up with.
Actually, interestingly, we've recently interviewed Nancy Pelosi and Rosa DeLauro, these kind of big figures of the Democratic Party in the United States, and they also grew up in houses with parents who had, in their case, they were sort of local councillors, mayors, had these amazing open houses. In their case, they're older than you, running through the 50s and 60s. But I think part of their formation as politicians seems to have been this sense of their family house being an amazing kind of meeting ground for communities.
Your mum and dad were both Labour councillors, weren't they?
They were. So my dad just, I think, started off through, being the local vicar. He was always motivated first by his Christianity. But, just praying for people who live in that community wasn't practical enough. So he got into politics, and our house became an HQ for the Labour Party. So he became, and it was a solid Labour area, and it was a marginal seat. So you can imagine, election times, everybody piled in. But our house, I mean, you think back, it was, we had 3 First Ministers who used to turn up all the time. So Alan Michael was a youth worker in the area, Mark Drakeford was a youth worker in the area, and Rory Morgan became the MP.
Wow.
And then we had George Thomas was the MP before.
Speaker.
So the Speaker of the House of Commons.
And Mark Drakeford, your predecessor as First Minister.
That's right. And George Thomas, for example, so he was the MP before. He's the one who, I think, helped to persuade my dad to go into politics.
So you knew some of these people almost from childhood. It was almost like part of a family. Yeah.
Oh, definitely.
And you were out on the streets leafleting,
I was
campaigning.
leafleting from 6 years old. So it was just all part of what we just mucked in. It was just part of what we did.
And you're a Christian.
Yeah.
How does that frame and form your politics?
I think it's shaped everything, and the thinking and my motivation. I think it's through that example that I saw through my parents. My husband, who has just retired as a GP, is also now a priest in the Anglican Church. So, I'm absolutely surrounded by it. And for me, it's an important touchstone for me to just kind of check where I am in terms of decision making. It's like a little voice on my shoulder all the time, just making sure I'm in the right place, I guess.
Last night, I bizarrely found myself speaking to 150 Anglican clergymen at a foundation called For the Education of London Clergy. It's like a 500-year-old thing. And sitting there was Liz.
I wish I'd been there.
Was Liz Truss's uncle.
Oh.
The Reverend Truss.
Is he a clergyman?
A clergyman, yeah. And I was thinking about the fact that at the heart of the Christian message is the idea of hope. The idea that when things are very, very dark, despite all the horrors of human nature, there is the possibility of redemption. There's the possibility of hope. Is that something that you feel when you look at all the very difficult, dangerous things that seem to be happening around the world and accelerating around the world?
Look, I think if you don't have hope, you're going to lose your motivation to do anything. So hope for me is fundamental, and hope for everyone. That's the other thing. It's got to be hope that touches the lives of people who currently are in despair and who struggle with their daily lives. Where's the hope that we can offer them as a society? And that's certainly, for me, something that motivates me and is in that Christian philosophy.
What did your experience in the European Parliament teach you about your own relationship with politics and what you felt you could do? And then I guess related to that, what are your reflections about our leaving the European Union and how we've handled it since?
So I went into the European Parliament at a really interesting time. It was 1994. So the single market was just being developed, trying to make sure we could all buy and sell goods across the nations, and what did that look like in terms of the impact on the social contract with society. All of those things were really important. Also the structure of how it worked. The only way you could get things done was by compromising with people who you didn't necessarily agree with. So that approach to politics, which is you got to compromise. You want to get something done, you might inch ahead rather than, march ahead. That's an approach that, I understood there. It's certainly something that works, as you know, in the House of Lords, and it's something that we have to practice as well in the Welsh Parliament. We've never had a majority in the Welsh Parliament. So that compromise to get things done, even if you're not getting to the ideal that you want to get to, I think is fundamental.
And it was also almost the glory days of Europe, wasn't it? So this was the creation of the single market. It was also the run-up to the accession of 10 new countries, Lithuania and Romania's economies being completely transformed. It must have felt a very exciting moment. You were relatively young and you were seeing it through the 90s, early 2000s, when everything seemed to be going very well.
It was amazing. And, I was 27 years old, youngest member of the European Parliament. And it was a really exciting time. And then a couple of years later, we had the Labour government, and that shifted the dynamic again. So all of that was really exciting. And, I watched as those new countries came in. First of all, I think Finland and Sweden, the language changed. The language of the corridors when I started was French. And after those three other countries came, it switched to English. So it was really interesting. And then, of course, the Eastern Europeans came in, and that really switched it entirely again. So it was a really exciting time to be a part of that. But, the story came to an end in a really sad way. I'd left the European Parliament by then. But, I was devastated by the vote, particularly in Wales. Very, very disappointed after Wales had received massive sums from the European Union, and that was a tragedy, I think, and I think we will pay a big price for years to come.
What are your reflections about why it happened, where the debate is now, and what you've learned from it?
Look, I think we were never great at connecting what was happening there with the lives of people in our communities. Although, ironically, in Wales, of everywhere, everywhere you looked,
the flag was everywhere.
Their flag was everywhere. And I remember, straight after the referendum, there's this interview with this guy standing in Blaine Gwent saying they didn't do anything for us. And he's standing in front of a college entirely paid for by the European Union, all the courses paid for by the European Union, a leisure centre next door paid for it. You just think, my God, So we obviously didn't do a very good job at telling people how the European Union was touching their lives. But what was interesting for me was, at the time, I was in the House of Lords, and I was leading for Labour in the House of Lords on the Brexit referendum bill. And, I just remember thinking, God, they're being complacent here. I remember speaking to people from the FCO. There was no sense of panic or preparation. And, I was going home to Wales every weekend and canvassing, and it was bad. It was really bad on the streets. And it was that utter disconnect from the people making policy here in London, cosmopolitan, multicultural, from the kind of societies that, I represent Mid and West Wales. It's a long way from London. even Cardiff, you've got to get out of Cardiff to get a sense of what people on the streets were thinking. And, it wasn't good.
I guess stepping back, one idea might be that this is the result of a fundamental breakdown of the whole liberal market model. 2008 financial crisis, the crises that followed in Europe after it, wages that have been stagnant since the late 1970s, a sense that Western economies, not just Britain, but Europe, United States, facing really fundamental problems with the way that the financial system works, the way that incomes work. Do you feel that?
Look, I don't think austerity helped because, the first places are cut are the things that touch people's lives. And, they've been feeling it. And, for that to happen for a couple of years is something, but for it to happen for a decade and more, that is really hurting people and it's affecting people. And, that whole build up to Brexit, I think where people get their information from, what they're hearing, I think all of that stuff is all come at the same time. So I do think we've got a challenge in terms of how we communicate and how we reach into people's lives now.
But am I detecting that you're not quite going as far as I am? You're not quite saying there's something fundamentally wrong with this economic system?
No, I don't. I think there was something wrong with the way the Conservatives managed the economic system. And, it's incredible, that they want, people like Liz Truss wanted to go even further. I believe in intervening in the market. I believe that actually we have a responsibility and the market's got to work for the people. It's not got to be the other way around. So I'm very clear that the model is okay. How you manage the model is the challenge.
Are you not frustrated as I am that despite, I think all three of us agree that Brexit has not gone well and it's done fundamental damage to us as a country, that there's no real sense of, it's not even just about revisiting the big decision, but even revisiting debate about the consequences we don't seem to be having. And I just wonder if in Wales you've got more freedom maybe to do that.
I think as political leaders in Wales, we've always made it clear we were really disappointed with the result. But, the people in our country also voted against. Now, I'm not sure if they would today, but I'm still not sure if they would understand the connection with their lives. And I remember on the day of the referendum itself, finally, going into a shop and asking the guy behind the counter, have you voted? He said, yeah, I voted. And he said, I voted against. And I said, what did you do that for? And he said, well, it's not going to impact on my life. And it just made me think, it just made me put myself in his position. And I thought, actually, lots of the things we sold the referendum on, freedom of movement, being able to use your mobile phone, all of those things. He wasn't going to do any of those things. And so it's very difficult. It's a complicated argument to demonstrate to that bloke in the shop how it was going to affect his life.
You're looking now at some very significant reforms to the way the electoral system works, to the composition of the Senedd. And one of the possible consequences is that it could give space to the Reform Party, the ex-Brexit far-right party, and Nigel Farage.
Because it's a more proportional.
Yeah, and Nigel Farage has just been in Wales and seemed to get pretty good turnout at his meetings and things. How do you think about this? Because it's a big thing that Alastair and I often talk about, whether more proportional systems are better at dealing with populists or whether they actually provide routes in for populists.
Look, if you don't provide a platform for them to at least be able to express their views and then you can take them apart on it, you finish up with Trump. So, you can't ignore the elephant in the room. I think you've got to take it on. And, we're going to have a change of a system now that means that we'll go from the least well-represented parliament in Britain to being at least middle tier.
So what does that mean?
So we're going from 60 members to about 90 to 96 members because actually we've had all of these additional powers and we just don't have enough people to actually run the parliament, to do the scrutiny and things. There's a really practical issue there.
So more people?
So we've got more people. But yeah, on the new system, it will be a proportional system. we have a semi-proportional system at the moment. I'm elected as a regional member, proportional basis. And so, we had UKIP members in the Parliament. They fell apart the moment they walked in there. I think there were 3 different parties by the end of the 5 years they were in there. So giving them the space to make a fool of themselves, it's difficult because you don't want them to get in the first place. But at least between now and then and the election, we're going to have an opportunity to really scrutinise them, to put under, to look at what are they going to do. They give simple answers to really complex questions. And I think you've got to take them on.
And the fear, of course, is that Alastair and I, after the elections, might be looking at a situation where Reform get the second highest number of votes. And then we start...
Is that possible?
I don't know whether that's possible. I think they're not really perceived as a Welsh party. They're seen very much as a kind of British English party.
Is pride a bigger threat?
But First Minister, it's not impossible, is it?
It's not impossible. It's not impossible, and we've got a lot of work to do between now and then.
Do you think, both in relation to Brexit and maybe in relation to the then decline of Scottish Labour, that there's a danger that in all those places where Labour has been traditionally very, very strong, that there's been an element of taking for granted?
I don't think we've ever taken them for granted in Wales, and don't forget we've been a winner in Wales for 102 years.
Yeah.
102 years. This is
pretty good.
A successful machine. But one of the things I've done since coming in is the first thing I did was I did this big listening exercise. I just got out on the streets all around Wales and literally just asked people what they wanted. What did they think we should prioritise? And it was, it was raw and it was dirty and it was, what do you want us to do? And, I've come back now. Before I appointed anybody to the cabinet, I said, you've got to sign up to these priorities because this is what the public told us were
and
most
what
important.
What was the message that maybe we wouldn't know?
Well,
we wouldn't expect.
I think the message is not unexpected. It's focus on the things that matter to us in our lives, day in, day out, and don't get distracted by the other stuff.
And what are they? What are those issues?
Well, it's make sure the health system works properly. They were really upset with us at the time about the introduction of 20 miles an hour in certain places. It's all that kind of stuff that really upsets them day in, day out on their streets. They thought some of our town centres were scruffy. Those kind of bread and butter issues that we're sometimes distracted from. And, when you've been in power for 25 years, you can see that you might get distracted. So I've said, come on, let's get back to bread and butter. And that's what we're doing now.
Put those two things together. So number one priority, health. You've been in power for 25 years. And I guess that's interesting because Wes Streeting's now taking over and he's got these very bold ideas about what he's going to do in health. He's going to go analog to digital. He's going to go hospital to primary. He's going to go from cure to prevention. And I guess I feel, having been part of a government that's just stepped down, those things are actually more difficult in practice than they seem in theory. And presumably that's what you've found over 25 years, that health reform is not that easy. Can you talk a little bit in a way that the public can understand about why, in practice, health reform is often less easy than it sounds in theory?
Yeah, well, we're about 7 years into a strategic health plan, which does exactly that. It's taking shifting the balance from hospitals into the community. It's getting into the prevention space. It's moving to digital. The real challenge is, at the same time as you're doing that, your waiting lists are going up. Okay? And that's where the public focus.
And that's because in moving money from hospitals to primary care, it means there's less money to deal with the waiting list in the hospital.
So the slack is always, where's the bit that you can cut? And the bit you can cut is the planned care side of things. And but that's what then leads to a change. But I tell you what, the amount of work that's done in the health service in Wales is quite remarkable. We have 2 million contacts a month in a population of 3 million people. A month. It's just quite remarkable. So, the vast majority of people are getting a really good service. But because we've started to do that shift, then your waiting lists do start to go up. And, it's a balance. But if you don't do it, you're never going to fix the problem.
Back to the new political system, you're going to have a lot of politicians in Wales. Mm. Is that a problem at a time when people are a bit negative about politics? Well, you're going to have, if you take in Parliament, the Senedd, local authorities, you talk about 300 odd politicians for a population of 3 million.
Yeah, look, we've already taken one tier of government out, and obviously, we don't have any Euro MPs anymore. We've also just had a number of MPs cut from Wales from 40 to 32. So, and actually the power now, a lot of the power is in the Senedd. So it makes sense for us to make sure that it grows. You're right. We've got real challenges around quite how many local authorities we have, but again, that's a very difficult nut to crack.
Do you think it's going to change the nature of campaigning, this new system? Will you have to campaign in places that maybe you have taken for granted?
It's going to change entirely our method of campaigning, and nobody's done this in Britain in the way. So we're talking to our continental allies about how does this work? What's the best way to win these elections? Because it's a new system, but I think it should invigorate the party in those communities that are all sent out to the marginal seats in an election. So, I think they're all ready to get going on their own doorsteps for a change, and I think that'll be a great thing.
And so just on this, why are you doing this? I mean, you already had something that felt a bit more, less Westminster and a bit more like, I suppose, Scotland or New Zealand or Australia, a sort of hybrid system, which is the kind of system that tends to appeal to us. Why did you decide to push one stage further?
Well, because it was really difficult to get our Senedd to function properly. You literally had 4 people on a committee and they had to serve on 3 different committees. I'm
talking about changing to a more proportional system.
Oh, well, some of that was about compromise, if we're honest. We wanted to expand the Senedd. If you want to make those fundamental constitutional changes, you need 2/3 majority. And we had to do a deal with Plaid Cymru. So that was part of the reason why we did that.
It's sort of practical politics. Can I have one more bite at the NHS apple? Obviously, you're taking a risk as a politician being honest and open about this, but this is central to what's happening now in England. This is probably the number one issue that people are worried about. And I'm so struck that what Wes Streeting is saying is almost identical to what Rishi Sunak was saying before the election, and it's almost identical to what you've been doing for 7 years. In other words, the entire country agrees on what ought to be done. The problem is doing it. Can you just develop a little bit more so people can understand what the next 4 or 5 years is likely to feel like in England if you start pursuing those policies? Because you're 7 years ahead of us, right?
Yeah. So already things like, for example, we've changed the GP contract. So it's very difficult in England, I understand, to get a GP appointment. We've changed the contract in Wales, so that 8 a.m. bottleneck has largely disappeared because we've changed the contract. Dentists, we've changed the contract for dentists. So, we've already introduced about 380,000 new NHS dental appointments. We've shifted. So optometry, you can go to your local optometrist and not just get your eyes tested, but they're checked for lots of health conditions. Pharmacies, so we started on that journey with pharmacies a long time ago. You can get help for 27 different conditions in the community now in your pharmacy. I think it's about 7 in England. So all of those things are helping to keep people out of secondary care.
So that's brilliant for the long term, but in the short term, waiting lists, and what are the other, when you're being attacked by other parties in the short term, what are the short-term problems that you went through over the last 7 years, which people can point to, and which it's likely in England people will say, hey, this is happening while the long-term improvements are happening?
So part of the problem is you need to ideally run two systems at the same time while you're doing the transition, and for that you need a lot of money. And that's the challenge. And I know health just had a big uplift. But actually, once you take inflation to account, people's pay, 65% of what we spend on health, certainly in Wales, goes straight into people's salaries, 10% on medicines, price of medicines going through the roof, all of these things. And in Wales, don't forget, you get free prescriptions. So
waiting lists go up, cancer survival rates can sometimes go in the wrong direction. So that can be, in the short term, you can see indicators that people will say, oi, this is going wrong, at the same time as you think you're making the right.
Well, that's the challenge, is how you get that balance in the right place without the kind of resources that you really need.
And the risk is that Labour goes into the next election without quite having had the time to put all the reforms in, with people pointing to the transition.
Those reforms are not going to happen overnight. Try and get digital transformation done in the NHS, where all the systems talk to each other. There are really practical issues like, are there enough technicians? It's not even about, everybody wants these people. Everybody wants digital tech people, and there's not enough of them around. So, we're in a competitive market when it comes to the NHS as well, in terms of that transformation that needs to happen. And AI as well is potentially transformative.
Just sticking in the health arena, you were health minister during COVID.
Yeah.
Okay. Where am I going, Ellen? Where am I going? And as we now know from the COVID inquiry, WhatsApp messages had to be sort of handed over. And I mean, as you know, I don't swear very much. But what did you mean by "we're fucked"? And who was the we?
Yeah, I got into trouble with my husband on that one, because it was fruity language, and I promised him as a
good
priest,
Christian girl.
good Christian girl. I'm sorry about that, but there we go. I think that was an exchange I had with my counterparts in Northern Ireland, and I think it's when Omicron hit in December, and we thought, oh my God, what's coming at us now? And none of us knew what it meant, what was going to happen. And there was another occasion as well when there was a new variant, I think, in France, and nobody knew quite what it was and how it was going to happen. And at the same time, the Tory government was going, open the borders, let them all in. Our tourism sector is just about to collapse in London. I was just thinking, oh my God.
When we talked to Mark Drakeford here, do you remember he was sort of saying about how hard it was to get any sort of serious interaction with the UK government at the health minister level? Did it work?
Do you know what? It was quite good at the health minister level. So Matt Hancock and Sajid Javid were really serious. We met very regularly. It was a good relationship. The moment Sajid left, though, it all fell apart. I don't think I met a health minister for 2 years after that. And when we did have a brief meeting, he came out and threw me under a bus on a radio programme. Not great for the developing relationships. I mean, it fell apart after that. But during the COVID pandemic, it was actually really okay. Constructive, yeah.
Can I ask you about Welsh language? So where you grew up, were there many people like you sort of, fluent in Welsh?
So my mum is from West Wales, and I represent West Wales, and my mother tongue is Welsh. But we were brought up in this really anglicised area. Yeah. So hardly anyone, I think there were 2 or 3 families out of 30,000 people spoke Welsh on the estate. So I was sent to a Welsh language comp. And but the primary school, and this was very unusual at the time, there's only one Welsh language primary school in the whole of Cardiff at the time. And, I used to take a bus to school, and there were people literally lying in the streets and throwing stones at 6-year-old kids going into school because they didn't want a Welsh language school in their area.
Why?
Amazing.
Why?
There was a lot of anti-Welsh language feeling around at the time. From Welsh people.
What was that about?
I don't know what it was about. But what's interesting is there's been a transformation in relation to that. And, we've gone from, one primary school now in Cardiff to about 26. So it's there's huge growth, real transformation when it comes to, an understanding that actually this language belongs to us all. Let's all have a little piece of it.
First Minister, would you, I want to launch a campaign where I would like everybody in every nation in the United Kingdom to learn a little bit of each other's languages. So my dream would be that a school child in Dorset or Darlington would get an acquaintance with a little bit of Welsh, a little bit of Scottish Gaelic, because they're not fluent, but some greetings, a little bit of awareness of the language. Do you think it's worth doing as somebody who's a bilingual person?
Look, we're trying to do that in Wales to start. So let's try that to start, shall we? So, even within the civil service, it's like, come on, guys, answer the phone, say Bore da, just so I'd like to just start in Wales, if you don't mind, Rory, and let's look to the rest of the country after that, because we've got an ambition. We've got about 500,000 people who speak Welsh now.
500,000?
500,000, but we've got an ambition to get it to 1 million by 2050.
What was it when you were growing up?
Well, it was probably about 450,000 or so.
Right.
What's happened is it's been
around
dying for forever. It's been dying for a century, and what's happened now is it's levelled out, and there's a big push now to get far more into Welsh language schools.
Were you not impressed by the Welsh I displayed when we did our show in Cardiff?
Very impressive. Very impressive.
Araf.
Very impressive.
That was good. I heard about that.
Hesley.
Yeah.
So, First Minister, again for listeners, because I'm astonished by how many people in England have never actually heard anybody speak Welsh. I mean, you would not believe. Could you, given that so few people in England have heard Welsh, are familiar with it, can you give us a sense of speaking in Welsh?
Beth dwi eisiau gweud yw bod hwnna'n syniad diddorol dros ben, ond nawn ni ganolbwyntio ar pethau sydd yn fwy pwysig.
Which means?
Thanks very much, Rory. That was a great idea, but I think we're going to focus on much more important things. Is that right?
Smackdown.
Are you conscious of the fact that so many people in England are barely aware of what Welsh sounds like, have barely encountered it in any way?
You're right. There's a real lack of understanding. But again, my focus is on, come on, let's sort it out in Wales before we go anywhere else. So I love your enthusiasm, Rory. I applaud it. I'll focus on Wales. If you want to champion that across England, you be my guest.
With some support from you.
I'll, of course, give
But
you all
no
the support
money.
you need.
No
Definitely no money.
No resources.
Yeah.
What you've now 100 and something days in, and we've got a Labour government in Westminster. This may sound a ridiculous question because you're such a Labour person, but is there an extent to which it's actually quite helpful having a Conservative government in Westminster? Yeah. And what are the special challenges that come from having a Labour government? Well,
I mean, there are challenges because, I'm asked in First Minister's questions now on a weekly basis to account for everything Keir Starmer's doing. So, yeah, in that sense, it's difficult. I mean, I'm trying to give them lessons in how devolution works, which is fascinating, trying to tell Plaid Cymru, this is how it works, right? I'm responsible for this and he is responsible for that.
And why did they not particularly have to learn that lesson when there was a Conservative government in place?
Well, good question, Rory. But, my job is to focus on what I need to do.
And the answer, presumably for listeners, is that it's actually quite tempting when there's a Conservative government in place to allow the blame to hit London.
Yeah, but also, look, actually, we've seen a difference already. So the fact that we were able to give inflation-busting pay rises to, over 100,000 people in the public sector in Wales, that couldn't have happened without that massive injection of cash that happened over the summer. The Tories, they said that they were going to give us support to Tata, the steelworks that closed down. And, they were trumpeting all of this support that was going to be given, 80 million quid. They hadn't accounted for it in their budget. I mean, they just didn't tell the truth on it. And so, again, Labour had to go and fill that one. That's part of the £22 billion hole that they kept on saying was needed to be filled. So all of those things, it is making a difference. Listen, there's loads of areas where we disagree.
Why do you disagree?
HS2 for a start. I mean, I came on the lovely Elizabeth line this morning, lovely, and I just think it all comes to London. It all comes to London. The infrastructure projects. I want to see the wealth in terms of infrastructure and rail infrastructure be spread better throughout the country. HS2 was classified as a Wales and England project. There's not an inch of it in Wales. I mean, it's just outrageous. And love him. I remind Keir Starmer of that every single time I see him. It's got to be sorted.
What else?
That's certainly one of the things. We had an issue with coal tips. So removal of coal tips. You'll remember the terrible Aberfan tragedy. Climate change is changing. What happens is, all of those coal tips, we have thousands of them.
And they're very dangerous. They can, or some of them could be.
And that's the point. So we had a slip a few years ago and, they need to be secured. All of this was pre-devolution. So we shouldn't be clearing up the mess that happened from pre-devolution. And to be fair, they put money on the table to help us to clear those coal tips. as indeed they should. So there's a few areas like that where, we are making progress. We've got an issue with the Crown Estate, so we've got massive potential to develop offshore wind in Wales. So in Scotland, it's been devolved. What I don't want to see is the situation when we had with the coal mines, where all the wealth is taken out, and the people in those communities are left with nothing.
What's the issue with the Crown Estates?
So
don't want to upset Rory here because he's a very big fan of the Crown Estates. But...
Well, in Scotland, the Crown Estate is being devolved. So all of the money that will come as a result of developing offshore wind will go into Scottish Government coffers. In Wales, not the case.
You go to the
so
Westminster coffers.
Yeah.
So, listen, there's a few areas where we need to get a better deal. And
for that, presumably, it is better having a government of the same colour.
Absolutely. I mean, we couldn't even get through the door before.
And is the problem that you alluded to for First Minister's questions, and they're asking about stuff to do with Keir, is that because you don't want to be, in pointing out this is how it works, what you don't want to be doing is to sort of being thought to criticise him?
Well, I've got to be careful because on the one hand, of course, he's the same party as me. I'm very proud of what they're managing to do already. But if I have to account every single week for every single thing that Keir does, we're missing the point of devolution. I think I should be held to account for the areas that I have responsibility over.
Are you getting a lot of grief over the farming issue?
Well, I mean, it's a real shame because actually we've just taken a long time to come to a good place with the farmers. We're trying to change as a result of leaving the European Union how we finance them. And, it's been quite rocky, but we've actually got to a much better place with them. It's taken a long time. And then the inheritance tax thing came in. And look, from what we've seen, it's not going to affect lots of farmers in Wales at all. But, things are...
The politics of it are tough.
The politics of it is really difficult. I represent a rural area, so I've got to be super sensitive to this stuff as well. So there are areas where it's difficult.
Can I finish then? My final question. I know you spent time in Nicaragua picking coffee.
I did.
But you don't need to talk about that. Tell me about one part of your life outside politics which inspired you, excited you, formed you, that you think about a lot and that helped change your life in some way.
I think my upbringing was the thing that fires me up every time. And I was asked to do a speech a few years ago on, how to become a baroness, which was a really strange title. And I found that, 80% of what I talked about was about that upbringing and what shaped me and what drove me. So that, for me, is fundamental. But I also left politics to work in the private sector. Now, I went in as a bit of a spy, if I'm honest, just to find out, right, how do they think? Why do they invest? Why don't they invest? And I learnt such a lot. I tried to build a wind farm, and what was it? What are the barriers? So all of that is really, really useful for me now, coming in to know this is what we need to do.
My last question is about friendship in politics. And I said in the introduction that I really got to know you through Neil and Glenys. And I just wondered what you thought about friendship in politics and whether you think when you get to the position that you're now in, whether it's quite difficult to have really good friends in politics.
I think you need people that you can trust who've got your best interests at heart. And politics is a tough game. And having people like Neil and Glenys, who right from the beginning, you can imagine I was in university when Neil was leader of the Labour Party. He was like a god, and suddenly I'm kind of hanging out with him. It was a real privilege, but then getting to know him, becoming genuine friends, and particularly with Glenys. I mean, Glenys was a real inspiration for me. We went to the European Parliament together. We were 15 years together. We shared an office. We shared staff. And she was a constant inspiration for me. So that was really important. Neil is always there. He texts me after he sees me making a comment on anything. It's
Cheers,
really useful. It's really useful to just have someone who will also tell you straight, if he thinks you're going wrong. And there is room. It's important to have friends in politics. But you're right. When you become a leader, you've got to just be careful in terms of making sure that people are telling you for the right reasons.
Which maybe is part of the lesson as to how you got into the job in the first place, but we won't go into all that. Anyway, lovely to talk to you. Good luck with it all. And Rory will doubtless be back to you with demand for Welsh money for his campaign, for Gaelic in in Wales and Irish in Dover and Welsh in Yorkshire. It's great.
Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Thank you
very much.
Come on, guys. Diolch. You can try that
We can
one.
say diolch.
Thank you. There we go.
Diolch. Eluned. So, First Minister of Wales, that's our second First Minister of Wales. We did Mark Drakeford, but we're going to do Vaughan Gething, and now we've done Eluned.
Yes. Well, look, I really liked her. One small grumble that I get a little bit occasionally with interviewing Labour people is that tendency to kind of slap down Tories who are trying to be
Well, she didn't slap you down.
Well, it was my idea on doing Welsh language, exposing people to a bit of Welsh language in English schools. I think it would have cost her nothing to say, interesting idea, Rory. I'm glad that people are taking interest in Welsh culture, Welsh language. It wouldn't cost her anything.
Yeah.
It's obviously not her budget. Instead of which she chose to kind of make a snide comment in Welsh and make me feel stupid about it.
No, she said that she wouldn't necessarily see it as a priority.
Well,
it's a fair point.
Yeah,
fair point.
Lacks a bit of skill
But
there.
I thought she came over really nicely. I thought she was. I've known her for a long time, but because I've known her more as a kind of family friend through the Kinnocks. I've mainly seen her when she's been with the Kinnocks.
Right.
And that's in kind of social settings and occasionally in political settings.
And how is she in those settings?
Just very nice and very friendly and very warm and what have you. So I've never really seen her in what you define as a political setting. But I was impressed. I thought she came in, know what we're talking about, no paper sitting there, no aides hovering around saying, don't say this, don't do that. Just answered every question.
So she's another example of a clergyman's daughter.
Yeah.
She, again, a bit like what now is a massive list of people that we've interviewed, learnt about politics and public service at the family dinner table with endless people from the community coming into her home and seeing her parents.
And it really did sound like a kind of never-ending thoroughfare of people. And
yeah, he had the double whammy. He was both a major Labour Party player and the local priest on a rough housing estate.
Yeah.
Wales. I thought that was great. On the health thing, I think that is mesmerising because she is talking quite honestly about the problem that Labour is going to face on health.
In the UK government.
And in England particularly. What Wes Streeting is going to be doing is going off on this journey, which they've been on for 7 years. And of course, what happens when you try to do all this analog to digital, hospital to primary stuff, is you end up with really bad statistics. So NHS stats in Wales are really terrifying, right? Over 2-year wait, 24,000 in Wales, 107 in England. Waiting list, 1 in 4 in Wales, 1 in 9 in England. Seen within A&E within 4 hours, 76.3% England, 69% Wales.
And what's your...
Cancer 62-day target, 69% England, 56% Wales. Median wait, 23 weeks Wales, 14 weeks England. And what she would say in her defence, unfortunately, this is inevitable. If you're going to move resources from hospitals closer to the front line, you will go through a period where waiting lists are going to massively go up in hospitals. But what's the problem? The problem is Labour has said in England that their number one target is bringing down waiting lists. And this interview basically tells you that if they do that, they're not going to be able to reform the NHS.
My other worry about this kind of absolutely relentless focus on waiting lists for perfectly obvious reasons, both politically and the state of the health service, is that some of the other stuff starts to go to the back of the queue. I worry particularly about mental health on that.
Yeah, exactly, because that's another classic example of something which is supposed to be about prevention, not cure and community. Final thing, but it's not a criticism of her at all. I really liked her, and I did think there was actually a little bit of the Nancy Pelosi, Rosa DeLauro, Angela Merkel about the whole feel of her. Was that moment where she said she didn't think the economic system needed fundamental reform. And I was interested in that because a lot of people on the left would say, and I actually increasingly agree with them, that there's something pretty wrong. So much money has moved to a very few people. Wealth is so poorly distributed. Our financial markets wreaked havoc in 2008. globalization is clearly doing very strange things to people's jobs. Median incomes have stagnated since the late 19th.
And also the risk that a kind of AI, further technological revolution increases the inequality rather than addresses it.
Yeah. So I think that's interesting, isn't it? Because fundamentally, she still seems to be in the place of saying, look, the Tories grossly mismanaged things. Austerity was unnecessary. But she doesn't really think the fundamental structures of our economy need fixing. I wonder whether in 5 years' time people won't be like, whoa, we missed something there.
Or whether, given that she's only just taken over, whether she's still in that place where she won't necessarily want to say anything that is very, very far removed from something that Keir Starmer might say.
Got you.
So I don't know whether that might be part of her thinking, or whether she does think the current economic system works pretty well, which is very arguable.
Well, thank you for doing that. That was interesting and fun.
Good. See you soon.